Hey everyone, James from TeaDB here, bringing you another Inbetweenisode. So today I'm going to be drinking something that's not pu'er. I'm going to be drinking another one of my regular go-tos. I'm going to be drinking some WuyiOrigin from some Wuyi Yancha tea, rock tea from WuyiOrigin. So Yancha literally just means rock tea. One of the 4 different types of oolong teas, and definitely one of the regular brews for me. Some of you may or may not know that I do drink other teas beyond pu'er, and one of them, if you follow my sort of drinking log, which is just sort of a recording of my own, the teas I choose to drink just sort of on my own accord, is I do pretty regularly drink Wuyi Oolong tea, usually actually from WuyiOrigin. So this is a great example of a sort of regular brew for me. This is a sample that was kindly sent to me free of charge from Cindy. So thank you, Cindy, who has been very kind in providing a lot of tea for this podcast. But I'm also a customer at WuyiOrigin. I do spend my regular tea money there. And I think they are a good vendor and a good example of sort of a specialist vendor, and one that doesn't necessarily, they're not really like a general vendor. They mainly just sell Wuyi tea, as you can tell from their name, as well as some Danchong tea. I believe Cindy's husband has some roots there, so that's why they sell that tea. I drink that type of tea, Danchong, a little bit less than Yancha, because I don't like it as much, but it's also a fine tea, and they do a good job of sourcing there as well. So I'm going to start off just talking a little bit about kind of my own tea diet, what I like about these teas. So those that, are sort of like me and may sort of catalog their teas with like metrics such as dollars per gram and stuff like that, it's pretty easy to find out that Wuyi Oolong is not a cheap, very budget-oriented tea. You can certainly find inexpensive versions. I always like to talk about sea dike, which I actually don't drink hardly at all, but which is very affordable. But for a lot of the tea, it's quite pricey, and it's something that I struggled with a lot earlier on in my tea drinking experience. Some of my absolute favorite sessions ever have been with Wuyi Oolong tea. And so it's one of definitely my favorite types of tea, but there's a lot of things that kind of cut against that. There's the higher dollars per gram, the fact that you have to actually use more leaf generally to get those brews that are really special. Doesn't last as long. The elevation of the tea is lower than like Taiwanese oolong high mountain teas, which also go for much longer. But for me, the one thing I've just had to conclude is there is something that is very irreplaceable about Wuyi teas, and there's something just really special about it. And I don't know, it's probably some combination of the terroir, the area where it's grown in the Wuyi Mountains, historical growing area, as well as just sort of the processing. And having the 2 things done right really does make a really high quality tea. So I don't know that Wuyi tea is ever going to be like a drink 5 times a week tea for me, but hitting that sweet spot where I'm having it once or twice a week, I think is great. I really do like these teas, and if you're doing it in that fashion, then spending something like 50 cents a gram centered around, which is about what I spend, anywhere from that to maybe $1 a gram for a tea like this, I think it's reasonable enough, at least for my own budgets. And I do also think it's a tea that's worth spending that kind of money. So, I mean, they talk a bit about like relative cost and stuff like that. We're like used to ripe pu'er and things like that, where the norm, the standard of the tea is just you can get a pretty good quality dai tea for under 10 cents a gram. So, I mean, it's just a totally different scale. Okay, so enough babbling on. I'm going to be talking about the WuyiOrigin Shuijingui. Let's go. All right, so let's get going here. The tea is Shuijingui. That's one of the 4 famous bushes, along with Dahong Pao, Baiju Guan, and Tialuohan. I'm not versed enough in Wuyi tea to really tell you like the huge differences between them. Baijiguan's kind of an odd one, but just going to be talking about this tea mainly. So unlike other episodes where I'm bringing on something like a semi-aged raw or the ripe, I have not previously brewed this tea yet, so this is steep number 1 sitting right here. And the reason is that a lot of these Wuyi Oolongs, they're very dynamic. They change pretty fast. Pu'er, that sort of can give you a little bit time to settle in. Maybe the first brew is a little weaker than the third or fourth brew. So as a result, I don't really have major qualms if I'm only going to be drinking 2 or 3 steeps on the show to just sort of skip past those and get a feel for the tea. But for something like Wuyi Oolong, I do feel like you definitely want to get those steeps in. Also a tea, as I was mentioning earlier, that benefits from a high leaf to water ratio. I use about 5.5 grams, 5.6 grams for 70 milliliters. You could use even more. One way to do it is just to fill up your Gaiwan about 3/4 full, 2/3 full. I'd recommend doing that over less. So really wonderful, intoxicating aroma, just a lot of those minerals. This is a 2020 tea, so we'd expect the roast to be pretty strong. Filming this sort of at the very end of this year, 2020. Cheers. It's just really nice. Sort of like light creamy tones, a little bit of fruitiness, very complex already, high amounts of minerals, really rich. Yeah, a lot of sweetness. Not something you need to brew for very long to get that is when you're using a high ratio like this. Just really sweet, really wonderful. I mean, honestly, it's like a tea like this, which is not even, I don't think it's close to Cindy's highest end tea. It just produces really nice steeps. I mean, this is the same Europe, so in a lot of ways, this is not even the ideal time to drink this tea, but I really like it. All right, so going to be doing steep number 2. We'll do this on camera. And just the aroma just sort of fills the room. It really is one of the great things about this tea. So definitely one to especially pay attention to the early steeps of. I feel like these teas tend to evolve into more minerally, woody tones as they move on, which are fine, but maybe a little less dynamic and rich as these initial 3 or 4 steeps. Even from that, I'd say the aroma has changed. It's a little less rich, kind of moving towards that woody, minerally category. You can maybe get hints of that roast in there too. Yeah, I'm going to do another brew here too, just to show the color to you all. So yeah, it's coming out a real nice orangish red. Yeah. And this tea, I mean, it just kind of fills up the whole Gaiwan. So again, using 5.5 grams for 70 milliliters here. Or I guess I am using a Shibo, so not a Gaiwan, but I kind of think of it as a very similar device. Cheers. So yeah, it really has those minerals up front here. I'd say this tea is a good combination of some of that really complex, rich flavors that are different from roasty flavors and the minerally flavors combined with those more characteristic ones. Yeah, it's just really nice. It's good tea. This brew, I'd say, is a little stouter and maybe a little simpler than the initial brew. The aroma also has changed a fair amount. Let's see what it smells like now after the third brew. maybe a little more floral. So just one of those teas that really does, we talk about like gonghu, doing like these small cups and stuff like that. And honestly, for pu'er or something like that, it doesn't necessarily change that much steep to steep. Of course, it does depend on a variety of factors, tea, how you're doing it. But a tea like Wuyi Oolong, I do recommend getting a fair amount of repetitions with sort of this style just to see how fast the tea changes. I mean, it really is a wonderful tea for both, I'd say, newer drinkers and people that have been at it a while. So, yeah, well, some people have said I'm not necessarily chasing the dragon on Wuyi Oolong, and you're probably right about that. It is a tea that I do drink regularly, and I think WuyiOrigin is a great source for it, that offers a lot of what I really like about Wuyi Oolong tea for a pretty reasonable price. So, and I think a lot of other veteran tea drinkers also like them as well. So, going to continue sipping this throughout the day. One last tip I'm going to give about Wuyi Oolong that I learned from a Tim over at the Mandarin's Tea Room in New York is he likes to brew about 7 steeps for this and then set it aside for a few hours and then come back to it. And just give it a rest. These are not long-lasting teas, and the steeps change so much. It's not one to absent-mindedly brew. So I think that's advice that I've kept even after that session 8 or 9 years later. So it's one where, I just really try to savor those initial steeps, and then I'll give the tea a break and come back to it later, and then enjoy it probably in the afternoon. So thank you all for tuning in. And yeah, it's just leaving a nice, wonderful coating of the mouth as well. Thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you all next time. Cheers.